So here we've got a Vauxhall Agila 1.2. This is the Mark II version, and it needs new front discs and pads. So we'll have a look how we go about sorting that out. So the first thing we want to be doing is checking the brake fluid level, because if somebody has topped this up as the pads have worn, and the level's high, you'll find that as you push the pistons back later on, this is all going to overflow all over your engine bay. This one's such a mess it wouldn't probably make much difference, but so we'll have a little look inside. Probably plenty of room in there. It looks a bit brown actually, probably due for a change. Anyway, lots of room for overflow, so don't forget to do that. If it is full, you can get a clean rag and wick out some of the stuff, or a turkey baster just as well. So next stage, just pop your wheel trims off with a large flat-bladed screwdriver. To save damaging the wheel trims, if you look in here, you find that there are these things every so often on the radius, so put your screwdriver in there and the thing will come off very easily, like so. On this car the wheel nuts are 17 millimeters, so use a long bar like this to just loosen the nuts before you put it on the jack and the axle stands, otherwise you'll pull the car off the jack when you try and slacken them off. So with the car supported on a axle stand, we can now remove the wheel. Relatively straightforward. And there we have the old, rather lipped disc and reasonably low pads. I suspect it's probably lower on the other side, rather scored as well. Note the copper slip on the face of the disc, face of the hub I should say. Probably worth doing. These are steel wheels, so they're not going to stick too badly onto here, but it can sometimes make a difference when you're changing tyres and so on. Now then, these are the replacement discs. I didn't specify these parts, they're being done as a favour, so that they're a no brand. I'd recommend you get something like Delphi, Ferodo, Bosch, or somebody halfway decent, particularly if you're an enthusiastic driver. Anyway, as you can see, they come in plastic bag and they've got a sort of greasy substance all over the surface, and you'll need to clean that off with meths or brake cleaner or similar before you fit them, otherwise you contaminate your shiny new pads. Next stage is always worthwhile swizzling the steering around so that you can check your boot while you're there, but also gives you much better access to the caliper, and you'll not be struggling with your long tools fouling on the trim. So first job is to remove these two bolts. These are both 13 millimeters, and then you'll be able to, with a little bit of wiggling, because bear in mind there's a lip on the edge of the disc here, so the pads are going to have trouble coming over that lip, so you might need to wedge a screwdriver in and give it a little wiggle to push the pads away from the disc. Be careful if you're keeping the disc and you're just doing the brake pads, because you don't want to mark the disc. And then have some means of supporting the caliper when you take it off, because this rubber hose is not all that substantial. You don't want to leave the weight of the caliper hanging on the hose or you'll split it. Once you've got these 13mm bolts moving, you'll find that the whole thing will start to rotate, so get a 15mm spanner, just pop it on there, and then you've got something to resist the twisting when you undoing with your 13mm. So here you can see this is the piston and this is the brake pad, so quite easy to get a screwdriver in there and then just pull in this direction, and this will push the piston back sufficiently for you to be able to get your caliper off over the disc. If you don't have a brake caliper rewind tool, you can actually use the screwdriver to push back the piston all the way back to put your new pads on. Doesn't push the piston back absolutely square in its bore, so probably better to use a piston rewind tool if you got one, but if you don't, this does work and will allow you to get the job done. So find a toolbox or something just to rest your piston caliper on, so the cable's not under stress. So this is the caliper off, and you can see the brake pads here on their little anti-rattle springs. Just to pop them out. Of course, be a little bit kinder to your disc if you're keeping it. And they're reasonably warm. And same with the other side. You can take off and clean these anti-rattle springs here. So the caliper carrier bolts that we'll be looking at next, one here and one at the top here. These are 17 millimeters on there, and they will have thread lock on. These are safety related items. Strictly speaking, you should probably replace these bolts every time you remove them, but if you're not going to do that, just look after them, make sure they're in good condition, and put thread lock on when you're reassembling at the right torque that we'll come to later. Whilst you're here, check that the sliding mechanism is all still nicely greased. If it's all gritty, you can just flick the boot off here. You can take the clip off and re-grease it, but these are in good condition, so we're going to leave them alone. So once you've undone those two bolts, the carrier will simply come off. Worth giving that a clean with a wire brush. Don't breathe any of the dust. I know there's no asbestos in modern pads, but still not great for you. So you'll need to remove these two screws, which just hold the disc onto the hub. Yeah, typically on this car they're really quite difficult to get off, so I've got my trusty impact wrench. We'll just pop this on and give it a good smack, and that'll get it going. You could use some WD or something like that to get them going and have a cup of tea while it penetrates. And then the old disc should simply come off the hub. Simple as that. Now, what I would do before you do anything else is clean this hub facing, because if you get particles on here, then the disc will not be true, and you'll find that you get a shimmy when you brake. So make sure this is spotlessly clean. So here we've cleaned up the hub just with a simple wire brush. We're going to put a little bit of copper grease on the surface of here, and then we're going to put our newly cleaned new disc on there. Make sure there's none of the shipping grease on it, and pop in the little grub screws, these little things which you may have had trouble getting out earlier on. The grub screws, incidentally, these don't do anything structural, so don't worry, they don't need to be put on hard. It's the actual wheel being bolted onto the car that holds the disc in place. These are just to sort of locate it, so don't ram them up really hard or you'll not be able to get them off next time. So we're going to refit the carrier. This will go on like so, and the bolts which came out of these, and these need done up to 95 Newton meters, and put some thread lock on as well. I'm going to do them up with a torque wrench, and you should too. Now that your new disc and cleaned sliders are back in place, all that remains is for you to put your new pads in on both sides. See if I can do this without getting in the wrong place on the video. There you go, a bit fiddly on that one. You have to put the toe of the pad under this bar. A little bit of a nuisance. Anyway, they're bedded on nicely. They've got an anti-squeal pad already on the back here, so you don't need to go crazy with copper grease or anything like that. And then simply the caliper fits back over here, and then we're going to do these bolts up here to a torque of 30 Newton meters. That one and that one, and that should be our job done. Pump the pedal a few times to put the piston, bed the piston onto the pads, and same with the other side. And that's your finished brake job. New pads in there, and all the nuts done up to the correct torque. So once you've refitted your wheel and just nipped up the nuts, we're going to put the car gently down on its wheel and do up the nuts in sequence. So this one, then this one, then this one, then this one, up to 110 Newton meters of torque. The reason for doing it evenly is so that the brake discs don't warp, especially when they're brand new. It could be important. I know this is not a very powerful or heavy car, but might make a difference.